I want to leave one little message, if I may. Don't think of the American Ethical Union as a small organization. It is an enormous organization with profound and far-reaching influence, far respected beyond its measure, its numbers. I have had this demonstrated many times.
One of the first times I visited with Ed, he talked about why he went into religious leadership, became a clergy person. He talked about seeing the example in Europe and noting that it was often clergy who were working most clearly against the fascists. And that for that reason, that's why he made a decision to change. And I think that little tiny anecdote is actually a beautiful representation of Ed's life and how he has chosen to use that life over and over again in many different aspects of his career and his writing. So he went to Starr King School for the Ministry out in California and then served Unitarian congregations in Oregon and in Fairfax, Virginia. And then from Fairfax was invited and joined the Washington Ethical Society as the leader there. He served as leader at the New York Society for Ethical Culture and then also as president of the American Ethical Union. You can see some of the things that he's the author of 4 books and a signer of the second iteration of the Humanist Manifesto. His book, The Humanist Way, is still the book that I recommend to folks at the Ethical Society. It really is a beautiful articulation of ethical humanism as a religious and philosophical way of life. And that's, I think, what sets it apart. It is about living ethical culture. And that's so much what Ed has done and who Ed is. So while Ed was in Washington, which is the part of his life that I know most about because those are the stories that I like to hear when I get to visit with Ed and Carol, he worked for civil rights against the Vietnam War. Actually early, one of the parts of that story is that Ed spoke out against the war before folks in DC were quite sure. And I often use that as an example at the Washington Society that we can hold disagreement about issues and still stay together as a community. And he modeled that so beautifully, his clarity of value while also serving the wider community and congregation. What has been most inspiring to me is hearing Ed talk about those years in Washington, years that were often very difficult in the national stage. And the work that he did and the values he tried to bring to that work. You know, Ed has accomplished so much that I can imagine feeling sort of intimidated, but because of who he is, I find myself instead inspired and invited into the work. In the last few years in particular, when Washington has been again, a somewhat challenging place to be, and the national stage has been a challenging one. I have to say I have found nothing more comforting than talking with Ed and hearing about the work that he did in other difficult times, to remember that we have done hard things before and we have taken strong stands and we have moved forward with justice has been truly a gift to me as I have tried to do just a tiny bit of the same kind of thing in DC in these times. He is welcoming, inspiring, and invitational, inviting all of us to continue to live the legacy that he is still creating. So I am just really honored to be able to be here and share a little bit about how much I have enjoyed and appreciated getting to be your colleague, Ed. And I'm going to invite John McCormick to, I think, do the honors.
If I may read the inscription. The American Ethical Union presents Edward L. Ericson the Felix Adler Lifetime Achievement Award in recognition for many years of service on behalf of the ethical culture movement. Ed.
I wish to thank the American Ethical Union for this marvelous honor. I owe special thanks and wish to give special recognition to the National Ethical Service Group. When I knew this organization in an earlier phase, it was the National Women's Conference. I saw the work of the Women's Conference in those years. When I first came to the New York Society, they were extremely active and had been active for years, representing us as an NGO, national non-governmental organization at the United Nations. Today, the United Nations is under attack, even disparaged at from the highest office in this land. We need the United Nations. We worked hard for the United Nations, and the United Nations represents the last great hope of humanity. And I wish to congratulate and honor the people of the Ethical Service Group Committee Conference for what they are doing there. It is one of our outstanding projects. Don't think of the American Ethical Union as a small organization. It is an enormous organization with profound and far-reaching influence, far respected beyond its measure, its numbers. I have had this demonstrated many times. I set up a group of, under the aegis of what we call the Center for Applied Ethics, think tanks on various specialties, various professional groups dealing with problems in government and business. One of those was conflicts of interest in the securities industry. This attracted the attention of a number of people in Washington. I was invited to sit down with the chairman of the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. But the day I went, the chairman was called to testify before Congress, so I had to settle for his deputy. With that background for ethical culture, I was invited by the newly inaugurated President Carter, by his White House counsel, to establish a think tank on improving and strengthening the ethics laws of this country. We rendered a report after study that we collected 14 men, 14 very distinguished, they weren't all men, 14 distinguished people from the New York area. The Deputy Mayor of New York, for example, and others, and Sidney Shawyer, who had served in Roosevelt's time as the administrator of the Economic Warfare Board during the Second World War. With such people, we were able to write a good, strong recommendation of ways to strengthen the law. And when we sat with the counsel to the White House counsel to the President, he gave us over an hour. We were in the Roosevelt room opposite the Oval Office. And at the end of that time, as the men of the committee rushed to catch the trains and planes back to New York, I guess they were all men, that particular group, Robert Lipschitz, the White House counsel, said, "Ed, can you remain behind, because I would like to call the Senate, the Governmental Affairs Committee, to suggest that your testimony, that your report become part of the written testimony on changing the ethics laws, strengthening them." This means to discourage the revolving door that certain officials must sign an agreement, a contract, that they will not move back and forth between government and private business in ways that involves conflicts of interest. That is the law today. And for a time it worked. But we learn another lesson. Reform has a very short shelf life. Every generation must fight the battles over and over again. We are resegregating. We are losing our civil liberties that generations of liberal-thinking people have struggled for many years. You're here to address the business of reclaiming democracy. Well, we never really had a democracy. We had part of a democracy. Ask the remnant of the slaughtered Indians whose land we stole. We don't like the Mexicans, those brown-skinned people who are in California or Texas or Arizona. We forget we stole that land from Mexico. We took 1/3 of Mexico. We are losing the sense of the brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity. We are of one blood. We are of one family. And we are being torn apart by those who think they are better than their neighbor. Let's not waste our influence. Let's use our influence. We are a weighty movement, far beyond what our numbers can suggest. Thank you.